Ethan thought he knew everything about justice. He was a lawyer, after all. But nothing in law school prepared him for betrayal from within his own family. When his father died suddenly, Ethan expected heartbreak, not deceit. The will should have honored years of loyalty and love, but instead, it left everything to someone Ethan once called uncle. What happened behind closed doors? And how far would Ethan go to uncover the truth and take back what was his? Ethan Graves was the kind of man who believed in doing things the right way. At just 30 years old, he had already made a name for himself as a rising attorney in Boston, a sharp legal mind, respected in the courtroom and admired by his peers. He wore crisp suits, spoke with quiet confidence, and carried himself with the calm precision of someone who had spent years studying both the law and human nature. But behind the courtroom poise was a man shaped by tragedy, responsibility, and loyalty to the one person who had shaped his world, his father, Richard Graves. Richard wasn't a perfect man, but he was fair. A former engineer turned small business owner, he'd raised Ethan alone after Ethan's mother passed away from cancer when Ethan was just 9. Their bond had been forged in grief, but tempered by mutual respect. Richard taught Ethan how to tie a tie, change a tire, file taxes, and most importantly, how to stand up for what's right. They didn't have much growing up, but Richard built a modest fortune over the years by investing smartly, buying real estate, and eventually starting a property management firm that slowly grew to cover most of the greater Boston area. By the time Ethan graduated from Harvard Law, Richard's net worth had quietly crossed into 7 figures. But he never acted like a wealthy man. He still drove an old Toyota Camry and grilled hot dogs on a rusty backyard barbecue. Ethan had always assumed that when the time came, he'd help his dad manage the business and ensure the family legacy continued. But that time came far sooner than expected. It happened on a rainy Thursday in October. Ethan was preparing for a court hearing when he got the call from a nurse at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Richard had collapsed from a stroke at his office and was gone before the paramedics arrived. No goodbye, no warning. The grief hit Ethan like a truck. He was stunned, hollowed out. There was no time to process it. There were funeral arrangements to make people to notify, and of course, the legal affairs of his father's estate to settle. And that's when things started to feel off. The first red flag came during the reading of the will. Ethan had sat in the lawyer's office expecting formality. He wasn't focused on the money. He assumed everything would naturally pass to him. He was the only child, after all. His father had no spouse, and aside from a few cousins scattered across the country, there wasn't much extended family. Except for one person, Uncle Martin. Martin wasn't actually Ethan's uncle. He was Richard's younger half-brother, from a relationship Ethan barely remembered hearing about. Martin had floated in and out of their lives over the years, always charming and funny, but unreliable. He'd disappear for years, then reappear needing a loan or a place to crash. Ethan had never trusted him fully. But Richard always said, "Family's family," and would hand over a check or a spare key. Still, Martin had never shown any real interest in the business or the family itself. So when the will was read, and the lawyer announced that the entire estate, Richard's company, real estate, holdings, and savings had been left to Martin, Ethan's stomach dropped. There had to be a mistake. He asked the lawyer to reread the document. He listened closely. No mention of Ethan. Not a single sentence. Nothing left in trust. No contingencies, no explanations. Just a clean transfer of all assets to Martin Graves. The lawyer, a tired man named Harris, who'd worked with Richard for years, looked just as shocked. "This wasn't the version I saw." "2 months ago," he said quietly. Richard updated it just a few weeks before his passing. "I didn't handle the revision myself. It was filed by another firm." Ethan's head spun. His father would never do this to him, not knowingly. He left the office in a daze, stepping into the cold autumn air, heart pounding. The grief that had been simmering in his chest suddenly ignited into something darker: confusion, disbelief, and suspicion. Martin had shown up at the funeral in a designer suit, suddenly gracious and composed. He offered Ethan a hollow smile, a pat on the shoulder, and a patronizing, "We'll figure things out, kid." But Ethan wasn't a kid. He was a lawyer, a damn good one. And something about this didn't add up. In the days that followed, Ethan tried to grieve, but his mind kept returning to the will, to Martin's sudden involvement, and to a single gnawing thought. What if this wasn't just an accident? What if Martin had orchestrated this? He remembered vague things, his dad mentioning a few health scares, but brushing them off. Martin visiting more frequently in the past month, always alone, always catching up, always. Richard hadn't told Ethan about the updated will, and that silence itself felt suspicious. That's when Ethan made a quiet decision. He was going to find out what really happened. Not just for the money, though, the betrayal cut deep, but for the truth, for his father's memory, for himself. And if Martin thought he could steal an inheritance and walk away clean, he clearly didn't understand who he was dealing with. Ethan didn't waste time. The day after the will was read, he took a leave of absence from his law firm, citing family matters. In truth, he needed time and freedom to dig. Something was off, and every instinct in him screamed that this wasn't just some unfortunate legal technicality. He began with the revised will. Through a few phone calls and some bar association connections, he tracked down the law firm that had processed the update, an obscure boutique firm in Worcester called Collins and Mathers. They had no website, no recent press, and barely any online footprint. That was odd in itself. When Ethan called, the receptionist told him that the lawyer who handled the case, Douglas Mathers, was traveling indefinitely. That sent up another red flag. Ethan drove to Worcester and showed up at the office unannounced. The firm's office was tiny, barely more than 2 rooms above a dry cleaner. It smelled like mildew and stale coffee. Inside, a nervous junior associate confirmed that yes, Richard Graves had met with Mr. Mathers to update his will, but all communication had gone directly through Martin. Richard had arrived with Martin by his side. Ethan's father, according to the firm's notes, seemed unusually passive and deferred to Martin on most questions. The associate hesitated before adding, "It felt off, like he wasn't sure why he was there." Ethan's heart sank. That wasn't the father he knew. Richard was a man of precise questions and careful decisions. He wouldn't defer to anyone, not even family. Next, Ethan pulled medical records. As Richard's son, he had legal access, and he poured through months of appointments, prescriptions, and checkups. What he found chilled him. Richard had been diagnosed with early signs of vascular dementia, a condition that could impair judgment and cognitive clarity, especially under stress. And none of this had ever been shared with Ethan. Why would his father hide that from him unless he hadn't? Unless someone else had made sure that diagnosis stayed buried. The pieces were clicking together like poisoned puzzle parts. Martin had clearly inserted himself into Richard's life in the final months, showing up more often, earning his trust, possibly even isolating him. And then just weeks before Richard's death, he'd walked him into a shady law office and coerced him to sign away everything. Ethan felt like he was unraveling, but he wasn't ready to confront Martin yet. He needed more. He needed proof. So he started going through his father's old emails, bank statements, and calendars. The deeper he dug, the darker the picture became. Large withdrawals from Richard's account in the weeks leading up to his death. Multiple unexplained meetings scheduled with M in his calendar. A canceled appointment with his regular attorney, Mr. Harris, just days before the will was updated. Ethan's jaw clenched. Martin had planned this, coldly, methodically. A week later, Ethan ran into Martin at the old Graves property office, which Martin had taken over. The man was sitting in Richard's old leather chair, his feet up on the desk sipping scotch at 2 p.m. "Well, well," Martin said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look who finally decided to stop sulking and come say hello." "I'm not here to say hello," Ethan said flatly. Martin's smile widened. "Oh, then what are you here for?" "Counselor, I know what you did." There was a pause, just long enough. And then Martin laughed, a short, dry bark. "You're angry. I get it. It's hard losing a parent. But you're barking up the wrong tree, kid. Your father made his decisions. Maybe he didn't think you were ready." Ethan stepped forward. "My father didn't even know what he was signing. You manipulated him while he was vulnerable. You took advantage of his condition." Martin's eyes narrowed. "Careful. That sounds a lot like an accusation." "It's a warning," Ethan said, "because I'm going to prove it. And when I do, that chair you're sitting in, it won't be yours anymore." Martin leaned forward slowly, the smile now completely gone. "You think the world works like your courtroom? You think justice always shows up on time, with a bow and a verdict, real life's messier nephew? People forget that." Ethan stared him down. "Then I guess it's time you remembered." He left without another word, his blood boiling, his mind racing. That encounter sealed it. Martin wasn't going to hand anything back. He wasn't going to confess. He was going to gloat, to enjoy his stolen victory unless someone stopped him. And Ethan. He wasn't just someone. He was a trained litigator, a fighter. And now he had a cause that was personal. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about legacy, about honoring a father who had trusted the wrong person, and a son who would do whatever it took to set things right. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became a ghost in his own life. He barely ate, barely slept. His apartment in Cambridge turned into a war room. Papers spread across every surface, photos pinned to corkboards, red string connecting dates, places, names. He was building a case, but this wasn't like anything he'd done in court. There were no clear rules, no discovery deadlines, no opposing counsel. Just him and the truth, buried beneath layers of deceit. Martin, meanwhile, wasted no time asserting control. He rebranded Graves Property Group as Graves Morris Holdings, moved the company offices to a sleeker location downtown, and liquidated several family-owned rental properties that Richard had vowed to never sell. Long-time tenants were evicted. Staff were let. The quiet empire Richard had built through grit and principle was being gutted by someone who saw it as nothing more than a cash cow. Ethan's anger wasn't theoretical anymore. It was personal, visceral. And yet the legal path forward remained murky. Contesting a will wasn't easy, especially when it had been properly signed and notarized. Claims of undue influence or mental incompetence required overwhelming evidence more than speculation or gut feelings. So Ethan focused on what he could prove. He started with the financials. Using contacts from his firm, he subpoenaed copies of Richard's recent bank statements and found something strange: a $25,000 wire transfer to a private account in the Cayman Islands 3 weeks before the new will was signed. The account belonged to none other than Douglas Mathers, the obscure attorney who'd prepared the revised will. That was the first domino. Next, Ethan tracked down a former paralegal from Collins and Mathers, a woman named Jenna, who had left the firm abruptly the month after Richard's will was updated. She was wary at first, but after Ethan assured her that his intentions were personal, not professional, she agreed to talk. What she revealed confirmed his worst suspicions. Jenna had witnessed the signing of the new will. Richard had seemed disoriented, confused. At one point, he even asked, "Is this the form for the refinance?" Jenna had raised concerns to Mathers, but was told to keep quiet. Days later, she received a surprise bonus and a vague warning to stay out of internal matters. Ethan recorded the conversation. Then came the security footage. Ethan visited the nursing home across the street from his father's old office. They had outdoor cameras pointed toward the intersection. With a bit of persuasion and a favor from an IT friend, Ethan acquired the tapes from the day of the will signing. The footage showed Martin practically dragging Richard into the law office, holding his elbow like a handler. Bit by bit, the narrative took shape. Richard, vulnerable and likely mentally impaired, had been coerced into changing his will. The attorney bought off. The witnesses silenced. The system manipulated. Ethan compiled everything: bank transfers, medical records, Jenna's testimony, and the video. It was enough to file a formal petition to contest the will based on undue influence and diminished capacity. But that was only the beginning. He needed the court of public opinion too. So he leaked. Carefully. A journalist he trusted from his Harvard days agreed to run a feature, an expose on inheritance fraud, using Richard's story as a centerpiece. Names were changed. The facts were blurred. But the implication was clear. Boston's elite started whispering. Martin noticed. He called Ethan late one night, drunk and furious. "You think this little media stunt will stop me? I earned this, Ethan. I was the one who cleaned up after your father when he started slipping. I was the one who made the hard choices. Where were you off playing lawyer while I kept his life from falling apart?" Ethan said nothing, just listened. Martin continued, voice slurred. "He begged me not to tell you. Said he didn't want his son to see him like that. He trusted me." "Then why lie? Why the offshore payments? Why the fake witnesses?" Ethan finally asked. The line went quiet. Then Martin hung up. The next morning, Ethan's apartment was broken into. The files on his investigation gone. The laptop where he'd stored backups smashed. The walls spray painted with the word traitor. It was a message, and a desperate one. But Ethan wasn't rattled. He had anticipated this. Most of the files were backed up on encrypted cloud servers. The originals were safe in a deposit box across town. If anything, the break-in confirmed he was getting close. He moved quickly, filed the petition, served Martin through his attorney. And then he waited. The legal battle would be brutal. Martin had money now, and he used it to hire a high-powered defense team. They attacked Ethan's motives, questioned the timing, painted him as a bitter son trying to rewrite history. But Ethan had facts, testimony, surveillance, and a quiet, simmering rage that made him relentless. As the court date approached, the case drew more media attention. Ethics watchdogs began investigating Douglas Mathers. Jenna was subpoenaed and given whistleblower protection. Martin started to look cornered, and that's when the twist came. Martin tried to settle. He offered Ethan a lump sum, $3 million, to drop the case and sign a non-disclosure agreement. The money, he said, was was a gesture of goodwill. Ethan stared at the offer for a long moment. Then he slid it back across the table. I don't want your money. I want the truth. Martin's expression darkened. For the first time, Ethan saw fear flicker in his eyes, because Martin finally realized he wasn't up against a grieving son. He was up against justice with a personal vendetta, and justice doesn't settle. As the weeks dragged on, Ethan's investigation gained momentum, but so did the threats against him. He felt like he was playing a dangerous game, a high-stakes chess match with Martin, who was now clearly aware that Ethan was closing in on the truth. Martin's public image remained flawless, wealthy, successful, and always in control. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling. One evening, while Ethan was deep into his research, his phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. The text was simple, but chilling: stop, or else. It was unsigned, but the implication was clear. He had crossed the line, and Martin had taken notice. This wasn't just about family betrayal anymore. It was about power control and Martin's willingness to do anything to protect what he had taken from Ethan. Ethan didn't hesitate, didn't. He forwarded the message to his lawyer, Rachel, along with all the other evidence he had gathered. She was cautious, urging him to stay under the radar, but Ethan was relentless. Every piece of evidence was another nail in Martin's coffin. He couldn't stop now, not when the truth was within reach. By this point, Ethan had already uncovered enough to bring the case to court, but he knew the road ahead would be far from easy. Martin's legal team was formidable, and they would fight every step of the way. The public exposure of the scandal had already caused ripples in Boston's elite circles. Ethan's name was now being whispered in the same breath as his father's legacy, both of them symbols of betrayal of money and power gone wrong. But Ethan refused to back down. He had learned early in life that standing up for what was right wasn't about avoiding the fight. It was about seeing it through no matter the cost. A week later, as he was preparing for a court hearing, Ethan received another surprise. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a physical threat. His car had been keyed, deep scratches running down both sides. And on the windshield, a note in bold, angry letters: "One more move and you'll regret it." Ethan's heart raced as he looked at the damage. This wasn't just a warning. This was an act of desperation. Martin was scared. He had always been the puppet master, pulling the strings, orchestrating his moves from the shadows. But now, he was playing his hand too early. Ethan knew that this could be his chance to press harder. He wasn't going to let a few scratches on his car intimidate him. He had something far more dangerous at his disposal: the truth. And that was what he focused on. He brought in an expert witness, a forensic accountant named Sarah, who had worked on several high-profile inheritance fraud cases. Together, they pored over every financial document, every transaction. Sarah's meticulous eye spotted something Ethan had missed: a set of offshore accounts linked to several shell companies, all operating under false names. The accounts, hidden in plain sight, had been used to funnel money into Martin's pockets, money that had been meant for Richard's estate. The evidence was clear. Martin had not only manipulated the will, but he had been skimming from Richard's assets for years. With this new evidence in hand, Ethan was ready to strike. But first, he needed to confront Martin. Ethan arranged a private meeting, knowing that Martin would never agree to meet in a public space. It was time to see if the man, who had once been a father figure, would finally show his true colors. The meeting took place in Martin's office, a cold, sterile room overlooking the city. The glass walls seemed to amplify the tension between them. Ethan sat across from Martin, who appeared calm but distant, as if he already knew what was coming. "You can stop this," Martin said, his voice low but steady. "You don't have to go to court. You don't have to destroy everything we've worked for. There's still time to make this right." Ethan stared at him, disgust welling up inside. "Make it right. You've already destroyed it, Martin. You took what wasn't yours, my father's legacy, my inheritance. And you expect me to just walk away?" Martin's face darkened. "This isn't just about money, Ethan. This is about survival. I did what I had to do to keep the business afloat. Your father, he wasn't fit to run it anymore. I saved everything, and you want to burn it all down for what?" "A little bit of money." Ethan leaned forward, his voice icy. "It's not about the money. It's about justice. You betrayed my father, and you used him for your own gain. You didn't just take the inheritance, you took his dignity." Martin stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed to keep this company running. You don't understand what it takes to make tough decisions. You think this is easy. You think it was just a game. It's not a game, Martin. You didn't make tough decisions. You manipulated a sick man, a vulnerable man, and you took everything from him." Ethan shot back, his voice rising. "And now you'll pay for it." Martin's eyes flashed with rage. He took a step forward, his anger palpable. "You want to destroy me, Ethan. You'll regret it. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Ethan didn't flinch. "I've spent my whole life." The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation as the trial reached its climax. Ethan sat at the defendant's table, facing Martin's legal team across the aisle. It was a battle of wits, of strategy, and deception. But Ethan had one thing they didn't: truth. And with that, he had the upper hand. His voice was calm, but every word he spoke cut deep, each point a precise strike aimed at the heart of Martin's carefully constructed empire of lies. The trial had dragged on for days, with Martin's team presenting their defense with all the flair and professionalism one might expect from the best money could buy. But it was all smoke and mirrors, distractions designed to draw attention away from the facts. Ethan's case was airtight. Every shred of evidence, the forged will, the offshore bank accounts, the coerced signatures, had been laid out for the jury. There was no denying that Martin had manipulated his brother in his final days, taking advantage of Richard's declining health and mental state to secure his inheritance. Yet despite the mounting evidence, Martin had denied it all. He sat there in his suit, playing the role of the victim, unmoved, unrepentant. It wasn't until the final day of the trial that Ethan would unveil his ace in the hole. Rachel, his lawyer, had been instrumental in preparing the final piece of their strategy, the confession. It came not from Martin, but from someone else, someone Martin hadn't expected. Jenna, the former paralegal from Collins and Mathers, was the last witness Ethan called to the stand. When she stepped forward, her hands shaking slightly, the room fell silent. She had agreed to testify under the condition of legal immunity, but her presence in court was enough to rattle Martin. Her testimony was damning. Jenna's voice was steady as she recounted the events leading up to the signing of the new will. She described Martin's pressure on Richard, his manipulative tactics, and how Richard had appeared confused and disoriented during the meeting. She even revealed that at one point, Richard had asked if he was signing a form for a loan application, indicating that his mental faculties were